New video in this morning showing us more of the destruction left behind after yesterday's protests in Washington, D.C. turned violent.
And breaking overnight, Congress has formally validated Joe Biden as the 46th president of the United States. And for the very first time, President Trump has acknowledged that his term is ending. In a statement released overnight, he said while he continues to disagree with the outcome of the election, there will be an orderly transition on January 20th. He was making that statement through his aide on Twitter.
Yes, and all of this developing overnight and happening right now. The curfew in place in Washington, D.C. is coming to an end. We have team coverage on all of this.
And we start in Washington, where we told you just hours ago, lawmakers confirmed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president of the United States. It's usually just a ceremonial proceeding, but instead the Associated Press described it as, quote, a nightmare of unprecedented political terror. Tracy Potts is live in Washington. And Tracy, they were expecting a protest, but they clearly were not ready for these riots.
Okay, so Capitol Hill is genuinely on fire right now with impeachment warfare that most people do not even realize is happening because the mainstream media has not been paying attention to what is actually going on in Congress. House Democrats have fired off 2 formal impeachment resolutions against Donald Trump, one sprawling 7-count indictment of his entire presidency that reads like a comprehensive case for removing him from office, and another focused specifically on his unauthorized military strikes against Iran that critics say violated the Constitution. These are not theoretical discussions or campaign talking points. These are actual impeachment resolutions sitting in Congress right now with detailed articles of impeachment that can be forced to the floor at any moment using special procedural rules that give individual members enormous power to disrupt the normal order of business. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Images that we saw in Capitol Hill that have not been seen for more than a generation in this country since 1812 when there was a siege of the Capitol building. This morning, Washington is waking up to a curfew that just ended just about 2 minutes ago and a state of emergency for the next 2 weeks between now and the inauguration. But lawmakers, after they were initially interrupted, came back and got that work done early this morning. Capitol Hill is quiet this morning after riots stopped the electoral vote count, sent lawmakers into hiding, and left 4 people dead, including this San Diego woman shot by police.
A woman died out there tonight, and you're making these objections.
The business of confirming Joe Biden as the next president continued all night.
Let me explain why this matters so much and why you need to understand what is happening. Representative Sri Thanadar's House Resolution 353 and Representative Al Green's House Resolution 537 did not come from Democratic Party leadership. They were what news outlets are calling rogue moves by backbench members using a special privilege process that can force the entire House to confront impeachment even when leaders desperately want to avoid it and focus on other priorities. That has Capitol Hill on edge constantly because at literally any moment, these lawmakers can hit send on what amounts to an impeachment alert that compels debate or a vote, putting vulnerable Democrats in swing districts and the entire 2025 Congress right back into impeachment warfare, whether leadership wants that fight or not. The 7-article impeachment resolution, introduced by Representative Thanadar on April 28, 2025, is extraordinary in its scope and ambition. It charges Trump with obstruction of justice and breach of his constitutional duties. It accuses him of usurping Congress's spending power by redirecting money that legislators appropriated for specific purposes. It alleges abuse of both trade powers and war powers in ways that exceed constitutional limits on presidential authority. It claims Trump violated the First Amendment by using government power to punish speech and silence critics. It accuses him of creating an unlawful office within the executive branch. It alleges bribery and corruption in how he has conducted himself in office. In the 7th article, and I want you to really hear this because it is remarkable language to see in an official congressional document, the 7th article accuses Trump of tyranny. That word is actually written into a formal impeachment resolution sitting in the United States Congress right now. On May 13, 2025, Thanadar filed a formal notification of intent to offer this resolution as privilege, which is a procedural move that fundamentally changes the dynamics of what he can do with it. A privileged resolution cannot simply be ignored or buried in committee forever the way normal legislation often is. When a member files notice of intent to offer a privileged impeachment resolution, it creates what is essentially an impeachment alert to leadership and to every other member that this is coming and they need to prepare for it. It means the member can force floor action, even if leadership would prefer to avoid the entire subject. Then on June 24, 2025, Representative Al Green introduced House Resolution 537, a separate single article impeachment focused specifically on Trump's military strikes against Iran that occurred on June 21, 2025. This resolution accuses Trump of usurping Congress's constitutional war powers by bombing nuclear sites in Iran without obtaining authorization from Congress first and without providing proper notice to congressional leaders as required by law. The resolution specifically notes that Trump apparently briefed foreign leaders about the strikes in advance while failing to notify the congressional leaders who are supposed to have oversight of military action. Green used the privileged procedure to force a vote on the same day he introduced the resolution, demonstrating just how quickly these impeachment alerts can move from introduction to floor action. The House voted 344 to 79 to table Green's resolution, which means to kill it without actually voting on the substance of whether Trump should be impeached. But that vote revealed deep and troubling rifts within the Democratic Party that are not going away anytime soon. Most Democrats joined with Republicans to kill the impeachment effort, meaning the majority of the Democratic caucus voted to shut down one of their own members who was trying to hold Trump accountable for what he argued was illegal military action. Only 79 members voted against tabling, meaning only 79 members wanted to let the impeachment proceed. The progressive wing of the party was absolutely furious at leadership for killing the resolution and accused their own party of going soft on what they characterized as authoritarian behavior and illegal war. News reporting from NBC and Yahoo and other outlets has described these as rogue impeachment efforts that leadership has desperately tried to shut down. The reporting explains that party leaders are warning these surprise impeachment votes risk the seats of moderate Democrats in competitive districts who do not want to be forced to vote on impeachment over and over again. But progressives like Thanedar and Green argue this is the only way to actually hold Trump accountable for what they call authoritarian behavior and illegal actions that Congress has a constitutional duty to address. They say the Constitution requires impeachment for exactly this kind of conduct and that political convenience should not override constitutional responsibility. The 7-article resolution, House Resolution 353, still sits in the Judiciary Committee with a small but committed group of Democratic co-sponsors. Outside advocacy groups are urging Thanedar to press the privilege button again and drag the broader comprehensive impeachment package onto the floor for debate and a vote. At any moment, he could do exactly that, forcing every member of the House to go on record about whether Trump's conduct warrants impeachment. This is not a theoretical possibility. It is a procedural reality that keeps leadership on edge and that could explode into a full impeachment battle whenever Thanedar or Green or any other member with a privileged resolution decides the moment is right. All right, so let me walk you through in much more detail what is actually in these impeachment resolutions and why the procedural situation on Capitol Hill creates constant potential for impeachment warfare to erupt at any moment. Because understanding both the substance of the charges and the procedures that allow backbench members to force action is essential for grasping why the situation has leadership so worried and why Capitol Hill is genuinely on fire with this ongoing conflict. Let us start with House Resolution 353, the comprehensive 7-article impeachment resolution introduced by Representative Sri Thanedar. This is not a narrow-focused resolution addressing one specific incident. This is an attempt to create a complete indictment of Trump's conduct since returning to office that would justify his removal through the constitutional impeachment process. Each of the 7 articles addresses a different category of alleged misconduct, and together they paint a picture of a president who Thanedar believes has systematically violated his oath of office in the Constitution. Article 1 charges Trump with obstruction of justice and breach of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. This article focuses on Trump's alleged interference with investigations and his use of the Justice Department to pursue political enemies while protecting allies from legitimate legal accountability. It draws on the pattern we have discussed in many other videos, the weaponization of federal law enforcement against Trump critics and the dismissal of cases against Trump allies. Article 2 accuses Trump of usurping Congress's constitutional spending power. Under the Constitution, only Congress can appropriate money and determine how federal funds are spent. The president is supposed to execute the budget. Congress passes, not make his own decisions about redirecting funds. This article alleges that Trump has repeatedly taken money Congress appropriated for specific purposes and used it for things Congress never authorized, fundamentally violating the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances the founders established. Article 3 addresses abuse of trade powers. specifically Trump's aggressive use of tariffs in ways that allegedly exceed what Congress authorized and that serve his political interests rather than legitimate national economic interests. There are ongoing court cases challenging whether Trump's tariff actions are even constitutional, and this article essentially argues that regardless of how those cases turn out, the pattern of abuse is severe enough to warrant impeachment. Article 4 charges abuse of war powers, alleging that Trump has taken military actions without proper congressional authorization and used the armed forces for purposes Congress never approved. This connects directly to the separate Iran-focused impeachment resolution that Green introduced. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war precisely because the founders did not want a single person to be able to commit the nation to armed conflict without democratic deliberation and approval. Article 5 alleges First Amendment violations, accusing Trump of using government power to punish speech he disagrees with and to silence critics and media organizations that report things he does not like. The First Amendment is supposed to protect Americans from government censorship and retaliation for protected speech, and this article alleges Trump has systematically violated that protection by targeting critics through various government mechanisms. Article 6 charges creation of an unlawful office, referring to administrative structures Trump has allegedly created that have no legal basis and that give him powers Congress never authorized. This is a somewhat technical charge, but it goes to the broader pattern of Trump creating mechanisms of power outside the normal legal framework that the Constitution and statutes establish. Article 7, the most dramatic, accuses Trump of tyranny. This is extraordinary language to see in an official congressional document filed through the constitutional process. The article alleges that the cumulative effect of all of Trump's actions amounts to tyrannical governance that is fundamentally incompatible with constitutional democracy and the rule of law. It argues that Trump has not just committed individual offenses, but has engaged in a systematic pattern of conduct that threatens the entire constitutional order the founders established. Now let us examine House Resolution 537, the focused single article impeachment that Representative Al Green introduced over Trump's Iran strikes. This resolution is narrower than Thenadar's comprehensive package, but it addresses what Green characterizes as an extremely serious violation of the constitutional separation of powers regarding the most consequential decision any president can make, taking the nation into armed conflict with another country. The resolution accuses Trump of ordering military strikes against nuclear sites in Iran on June 21, 2025, without obtaining authorization from Congress, first as the Constitution requires for offensive military action. The Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to declare war and to authorize military action. The War Powers Resolution passed after Vietnam further requires presidents to consult with Congress before taking military action and to seek authorization for sustained military operations. Green's resolution alleges Trump did neither. He acted unilaterally to attack a foreign nation without the congressional involvement the Constitution and federal law require. The resolution also makes a particularly striking accusation that Trump briefed foreign leaders about the strikes in advance, while failing to provide proper notice to congressional leaders who are constitutionally responsible for overseeing military action. Think about what that means if true. The president allegedly told other countries about his military plans before telling the leaders of Congress who have constitutional oversight responsibility. That would represent a fundamental violation of the relationship between the branches that the Constitution establishes. Green used the privilege procedure to force a floor vote on the same day he introduced the resolution, demonstrating the power individual members have when they use this procedural tool. Leadership could not simply bury the resolution in committee or delay consideration indefinitely. Green forced the House to deal with it immediately. The vote to table to kill the resolution without voting on the substance passed 344 to 79. That overwhelming margin might seem like a decisive defeat for the impeachment effort, but the internal dynamics revealed by the vote are much more complicated and troubling for Democratic unity. Most Democrats voted with Republicans to kill the resolution, meaning most of Green's own party sided against him. Leadership clearly wanted this to go away quickly and quietly, but 79 members voted against tabling, voting to let the impeachment proceed. Those 79 members represent the progressive wing of the party that believes impeachment is necessary and appropriate for Trump's conduct, regardless of political calculations about what might help or hurt in the next election. They argue that constitutional duty requires impeachment for exactly this kind of alleged violation of the separation of powers, and that political convenience should never override constitutional responsibility. The aftermath of this vote has created ongoing tension within the Democratic caucus that shows no signs of resolving. Progressives accuse leadership of betraying their constitutional duty by killing an impeachment resolution over illegal military action. They argue that if unauthorized attacks on a foreign nation do not warrant impeachment, then literally nothing does, and the impeachment power has become meaningless. Leadership and moderates counter that surprise impeachment votes are politically damaging and strategically counterproductive, and that the focus should be on winning elections rather than symbolic votes that cannot succeed in a Republican-controlled Senate anyway. The procedural situation going forward is what keeps Capitol Hill on edge constantly. House Resolution 353, the comprehensive 7-article impeachment, still sits in the Judiciary Committee. Bender has already filed notice of intent to offer it as privileged. At any moment, he could force it to the floor for debate and a vote. Leadership cannot stop him. They can only try to table the resolution the way they tabled Green's, but that requires a floor vote that puts every member on record. Outside advocacy groups and progressive activists are urging Thanedar to press the button and force the comprehensive impeachment package to the floor. They argue that the 7 articles lay out a complete case for why Trump should be removed and that Congress has a duty to vote on it regardless of whether conviction in the Senate is realistic. Every new Trump controversy, every defiance of a court order or threat against lawmakers or abuse of power adds fuel to their argument that impeachment action is necessary and urgent. Okay, so let us break down exactly what this all means and why the active impeachment resolution sitting in Congress represents such a significant ongoing threat to business as usual on Capitol Hill and such a source of constant tension within the Democratic Party. Because this is not just about 2 resolutions filed by backbench members. This is about whether the constitutional impeachment power will be used actively throughout Trump's term and whether Democrats can maintain unity when members disagree fundamentally about constitutional duty versus political strategy. Point number 1. There are formal, detailed impeachment resolutions against Trump sitting in Congress right now that can be forced to the floor at any moment using privileged procedures that leadership cannot block. House Resolution 353, with its 7 articles, including the tyranny charge, and House Resolution 537, focused on the Iran strikes, are not theoretical. They are actual legislative vehicles that exist and that members can activate whenever they choose. This creates constant uncertainty about when the next impeachment battle might erupt. Point number 2. The 7 articles in Thanedar's resolution represent a comprehensive indictment of Trump's conduct that goes far beyond any single incident or controversy. Obstruction of justice and usurping spending power and abusing trade and war powers and First Amendment violations and unlawful offices and bribery and corruption and tyranny. This is an attempt to make the complete case for removal based on a pattern of conduct rather than isolated offenses. Whether you agree with the charges or not, this is a serious and detailed impeachment case sitting in Congress ready to be debated. Point number 3. The privileged procedure that Thanedar and Green have used gives individual backbench members enormous power to force floor action that leadership cannot prevent. This is a feature of House rules designed to ensure that important constitutional matters like impeachment cannot be buried by leadership indefinitely. It means that any member with a privileged impeachment resolution can essentially trigger an impeachment alert that compels the House to respond, even if leadership would strongly prefer to avoid the subject entirely. Point number 4. The 344 to 79 vote to table Green's Iran resolution revealed deep divisions within the Democratic Party that are not going away and that will resurface every time impeachment comes up again. Most Democrats sided with leadership to kill the resolution, but 79 members voted to let it proceed. That is a significant minority that believes strongly in using impeachment as an accountability mechanism, regardless of political calculations. Every future impeachment vote will likely produce similar divisions. Point number 5. Progressives who support impeachment and leadership who want to avoid it are operating from fundamentally different premises about constitutional duty versus political strategy. Progressives argue the Constitution requires impeachment for exactly this kind of alleged presidential misconduct and that political convenience should never override constitutional responsibility. Leadership argues that impeachment votes that cannot succeed in the Senate are counterproductive and risk damaging moderate Democrats in competitive districts. These premises are difficult to reconcile. Point number 6. The language in Thanedar's resolution accusing Trump of tyranny is extraordinary and represents the most severe accusation that can be made against a president through the constitutional process. Tyranny is not a technical legal term with a narrow definition. It is a fundamental accusation that the president has become incompatible with democratic governance itself. Having that word in a formal congressional impeachment resolution raises the stakes of any floor debate to the highest possible level. Point number 7. The Iran strikes article connects to broader ongoing conflicts between Trump and Congress over war powers and who has authority to commit the nation to military action abroad. This is not a new fight. It goes back decades through multiple presidencies. But Green's resolution attempts to use impeachment as a mechanism for enforcing congressional war powers rather than just passing non-binding resolutions that presidents ignore. Whether that approach can succeed is uncertain, but it represents an escalation in how Congress might respond to unauthorized military action. Point number 8. Every new Trump controversy creates an opportunity for impeachment advocates to argue that this is the moment to force action. court defiance, or threats against lawmakers, or abuse of power or corruption allegations. Any of these can be cited as reasons why the pending impeachment resolution should be brought to the floor immediately. This means Capitol Hill exists in a state of constant potential impeachment crisis where the next triggering event could come at any time. Point number 9, the fundamental question underlying all of this is whether impeachment should be used as an active, ongoing accountability mechanism throughout a presidency or reserved only for the most extreme circumstances where removal is actually achievable. Progressives argue for the former, that impeachment votes create a record and force accountability even if the Senate will not convict. Leadership argues for the latter, that failed impeachments are politically damaging and strategically counterproductive. This debate will continue throughout Trump's term. So where does all of this leave Capitol Hill, as impeachment resolutions sit loaded and ready to be triggered at any moment by members who believe constitutional duty requires action? We have a situation where formal impeachment articles exist accusing Trump of 7 categories of misconduct, including tyranny. We have procedures that allow individual members to force floor votes that leadership cannot prevent. We have deep divisions within the Democratic Party about whether to use those procedures. And we have a president whose conduct continues to generate new controversies that impeachment advocates cite as reasons for immediate action. Capitol Hill is genuinely on fire with this ongoing conflict, even when it is not making daily headlines. The impeachment infrastructure is built and waiting. The articles are written and filed. The procedural mechanisms to force action are available and have already been used once this year. All it takes is one member deciding the moment is right to trigger another impeachment battle that consumes Congress and forces every member to go on record about whether Trump's conduct warrants removal from office. Whether that results in actual removal is almost beside the point for members who believe impeachment is a constitutional duty, regardless of outcome. They argue that voting on impeachment creates a historical record and forces accountability even if the Senate refuses to convict. Leadership disagrees and will continue trying to prevent these votes from happening, but they cannot fully control backbench members who are willing to use privileged procedures to force the issue. That is the story of Capitol Hill on fire with impeachment alerts ready to rush forward at any moment, and why Washington exists in a state of constant potential constitutional crisis over whether Trump's conduct warrants removal from office. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about all of this. Should Democrats be pushing impeachment more aggressively? Is leadership right to try to prevent these votes? And do you think we will see the 7-article impeachment resolution forced to the floor before Trump's term ends? Hit subscribe because the impeachment situation is ongoing and there will be much more to cover as members decide whether and when to trigger the next round of constitutional confrontation. See you in the next one.